And a lot of the bills and laws that I see coming out around technology and kids is treating the symptom and not necessarily the problem. On today's episode of Oh My Tech, I want to talk about government's role in technology. So I have had this discussion before, and I even brought on an advisor to Governor Cox in Utah, Amy Winder-Newton, to have a lengthy discussion about a bill that Utah passed a while back about social media and minors. I had a lot of criticism about that bill. There was a lot of things that I thought were wrong with it, but there is some things that I said in that discussion that obviously didn't lead to what the bills I'm going to discuss today are about. But I will say that Utah has made some significant improvements in the bills that they are now proposing, as opposed to that social media bill that I was very much against beforehand. So I want to talk about these two bills and a little bit more about where government might be overreaching or where they're getting it exactly right, according to my opinion. So when we were talking about the social media bills from a few years ago, I was very critical because I thought it was a huge overreach. Most of the stuff they said in the bill were things that you can already do as a parent. So I wasn't sure why the government needed to tell us that we could do these things as a parent. So I was very critical about that bill. But one of the things I said in my criticism of it is where government can make a difference is by outlawing phones in schools. And that is something where they wouldn't be overreaching because they are in charge of the public schools. And it's somewhere where I think they can actually make a big difference. The other bills were more treating the symptoms to the problem instead of the problem itself. It's like continuing to take Advil for a headache and then going to the doctor and finding out that you have a tumor in your brain. You can keep treating the headache, but you're never actually treating the actual problem, which would be the tumor. So you want to make sure you're treating the problem and not the symptom. And a lot of the bills and laws that I see coming out around technology and kids is treating the symptom and not necessarily the problem. As I've mentioned before, I was very critical of that social media bill from a few years ago. It did get blocked from the Supreme Court, as did most similar bills throughout the country. There was several states that kind of hopped on board with this bill, and they were shot down in almost every instance. But what we have here is some bills that might actually make a difference. So let's go over the two Utah bills that have just come out that I believe will be a precursor for bills across the country, just like the previous social media bill was. And we've seen Utah lead the way in this, especially with the bill restricting access to pornography websites. That came down in Utah first, and it has spread across the country into several states as well. So the first bill I want to talk about is Utah SB 178. I will link the actual bill in the show notes below, so make sure if you want to read it all for yourself, go ahead and click on that and get access to the specific wording that the bill has. Now, this bill is about devices in public schools, and that's the name of the bill, Devices in Public Schools, and the bill addresses the use of cell phones, smartwatches, or emerging technologies during classroom hours. The bill defines the terms cell phone, smartwatch, emerging technologies, and classroom hours. And it also allows local education agencies to create exemptions to this prohibition. So if your particular school district doesn't want to follow the Utah bill, they can create their own exemptions to this rule. But I'm actually a fan of this bill, so I am going to say I hope the districts don't deviate from what we've got here. There are a couple things that I am questioning, and we'll get to that. So the first thing, it's going to define basically what is a cell phone and what is constituted as a cell phone or other device, because they can't restrict like Chromebooks or things like that, because most schools actually issue Chromebooks to every child, or they utilize Chromebooks within their classrooms. But this is specific to mobile devices and smartwatches. The bill also defines what classroom hours are. So what it says is time during which a student receives scheduled teacher-supervised instruction that occurs. And and then it breaks it down in a physical or virtual classroom setting during regular school operating hours and as part of approved educational curriculum. Now, classroom hours does not include lunch periods, recess, transit time between classes, study halls, unless directly supervised by a qualified instructor. So if you have a study hall and a instructor is in charge of the study hall, then that could be qualified as a classroom as well. So it does not also include after-school activities or independent study time occurring outside of scheduled instruction. So we have scheduled instruction, and then the teacher can say, okay, now go ahead and study on your own. That would not be included in this classroom hours specification. So then it's going to go in and define what a smartwatch is and what a cell phone is and all of those things. But what a smartwatch does not include is a device that is just specifically to track an individual's location. So it doesn't include like Apple AirTag or a Tile device or things like that. Something that just has GPS and no ability to communicate with the outside world. That is not included in what this is saying. So the big concern that a lot of parents have when the government tries to restrict use of cell phone in schools is, what about an emergency? If there is something that happens at the school and I need to get a hold of my kid, what happens in those situations? So what this bill does not do, it does not say that they cannot have a cell phone on campus. That is totally not what this is saying. They can have it in their pocket. They can have it. They just cannot use it during classroom hours. If an emergency happens during classroom hours, what is the protocol here? This bill spells that out. It says that a local education agency shall establish a policy that allows student use of a cell phone or smartwatch emerging technology to respond to an imminent threat to health or safety of an individual or respond to a school-wide emergency, to use the Safe UT crisis line as described in Title 53B, or for a student's IEP, if a student has an IEP or a Section 504 accommodation plan, they might be able to use a cell phone, and to address a medical necessity. So let's say your child has type 1 diabetes and they need their phone and they are getting low on their blood sugar or whatever, and they need to open the phone to see where their levels are at. That is also covered in this bill. So I feel like it's pretty broad, and in that it's going to cover a lot of the worries and problems that a lot of parents might have with this. But what it also does is it allows the local school districts to make exceptions to these rules and establish policies for other circumstances where students may need to use their device. So studies have shown that the use of cell phones in schools is so damaging for education. I think this gives teachers some teeth in order to shut that down during their classroom hours so that they can teach effectively. And I love that. And I think it's not overbroad where it's going to make kids leave their cell phones outside of the school or anything like that. It's going to allow them to have it, especially in case of emergencies, and it's going to disallow them from using it during these educational time frames. And I think that is so important. And I think this is going to be a really good baseline for teachers to be able to enforce these laws. So the effective date on this one is July 2025. So this is going to be in effect for the next school year. And I mean, I'm thrilled about it. I think this is a great use of government. I think government is able to set restrictions on public schools. And I think this is a perfect way to do that. So for once, I am not critical of this bill. I think this one's great. So let's move on to the next bill that is getting a lot of attention that has occurred in Utah, and it's called the App Store Accountability Act. And this is SB 142. Again, I will link the actual bill in the show notes so that you can read it all for yourself if you are interested. I feel like this is the answer to what they tried to propose with the social media bill. I like this one so much better than the previous social media bill. I do have some questions and we'll get into that. But basically what this bill does is it enacts provisions governing app store operations and creates requirements for age verification and parental consent. So the previous bill that Utah tried to go with put the onus on the actual apps themselves. So Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and made it so that people who signed up for accounts on those platforms would need to verify their age to use that platform. Now, I've already laid out all of the problems with that, especially putting that onus on the different individual apps. And generally, I am not a fan of government overreach. Like I said, with the cell phones in school bill, I feel like that is not overreach. That is the government restricting things on public school property. And I think that is well within their right. Now, this is going a little further. This is telling tech companies what they can and cannot do with their software and with their applications. And so with the social media bill, I felt it was overbroad. It was very difficult for the individual apps to collect all that data. That's a lot of personal identifiable information out there for every user of every platform. But what I like about this new bill is it's putting that age verification requirement onto the App Store itself. So you wouldn't be able to access or download these individual apps without that age verification. And I think that is a much better way to go about this. I would even be a fan if they put it on the service providers, like Verizon or T-Mobile or things like that, because they already have your age information. Basically, I mean, you've signed up for the account, you had to show them your ID and things like that in order to create your cell phone account. So they already have that information. So I think that might even be a better place to put this. I'm not mad at them putting it on the app stores themselves. So this is going to put the onus on Google and Apple, and then we'll get into some of the other ones that I'm wondering if it affects or not, because it's not exactly clear in the bill. I'm going to go over kind of what it requires app store providers to do. So it requires app store providers to verify a user's age category, obtain parental consent for minor accounts, notify users and parents of significant changes, share age category and consent data with developers. I'm iffy on that section, and then protect age verification data. Definitely important for this bill. So as we go into the actual verbiage of the bill, first it's going to go into the definitions, obviously. But the definitions I was really wondering about is number 6, App Store provider means a person that owns, operates, or controls an app store that allows users in the state to download apps onto a mobile device. Now, my question on this is mobile device meaning a Nintendo Switch or a Steam Deck or something like that, because those are mobile devices, but they aren't necessarily cell phone devices. And I think they do define that a little bit further in section 13, where it says mobile device means a phone or general purpose tablet that, and it provides cellular or wireless connectivity. So if it's got Wi-Fi, is capable of connecting to the internet, runs a mobile operating system, and capable of running apps through the mobile operating system. So general purpose tablet, does that mean, could I do a Nintendo Switch as a general purpose tablet? I don't know. It's more of a gaming system, but it is sort of tablet form. And then again, with the Steam Deck, things like that, just these mobile gaming platforms, does that cover these? And now, in addition to that, we're going back to App Store provider versus to download apps onto a mobile device. Now, does that include Steam or Roblox? Because Roblox kind of is its own little app store, even though you download Roblox from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. But Roblox does have the ability to download specific apps within that game. So it's not clear to me if that's going to also affect those platforms. Now, when it's talking about in section 17, the definition of parental consent disclosure, so it's giving the onus on the App Store to notify parents of the potential problems with the app. But it's really specific about personal data collected by the app from a user and personal data shared by the app with a third party. So it's really specific about personal data. It doesn't necessarily enforce the app stores to talk about content or kind of issues that can be in the app, so game that is E for everyone could have user-generated content that is inappropriate. So does it require app stores to notify parents about potential inappropriate content? I would love to see that included in here. Section 16 defines what a parent account is, means an account with an app store provider that is verified to be established by an individual who the app store provider is determined to be at least 18 years or older. So my question here is anybody who has an App Store account. So if you have a Google account and you're a teenager who's 14 years old, does it need to be a requirement that it's tied to a parent account through something like Google Family Link, or in Apple tied to something like family sharing, so that that parental consent can be given for anybody who is a minor? Let's go into, so section 19 talks about verifiable parental consent is provided by an individual who the App Store provider has verified as an adult. So you need to be verified that you are the adult and that this child is tied to your account and is given after the App Store has clearly and conspicuously provided the parental consent disclosure to the individual, and then they make the affirmative choice. So that's kind of all the definitions. Again, I'm not clear on a couple of them and would love to see better clarity on those. So now let's go into what the App Store provider shall do according to this law. So in section B, it says if the age verification method or process described in subsection 1A determines the individual is a minor, then you're going to require the account to be affiliated with a parent account. Again, it's probably going to be a requirement to be affiliated through Google Family Link or Apple Family Sharing or something like that, and obtain verifiable parental consent from the holder before allowing the minor to download an app, purchase an app, make an in-app purchase. So essentially, if your account is a minor, any app that you download or install will have to be approved by your parent. So a parent would no longer have the ability to say, I don't need to approve individual apps. They can approve them themselves. Not going to be a thing with this. So the other question I have is, so something like a Android device has the ability to install apps through an APK. So are they going to add different consents to APK files where it will send the parent a notification every time they're going to try to download something that is an APK file that will require the parent to give consent to that application? Or do they end up shutting down APK access altogether? And if you're not sure what APK means, sorry, that's a way to install an application outside of the Google Play Store. Because Android is more of an open operating system, it does allow that capability. Through Google Family Link, you can shut down the ability to install APKs, but so I'm wondering how that's going to affect side-loaded apps like that. Now, one part that I found really interesting in here is in section E, in this first section of the App Store provider requirements, it says you need to notify a developer when a parent revokes parental consent. But the law doesn't provide that the App Store has to allow a parent to revoke parental consent. Now, this is a big deal in the iPhone world because with iPhones, you can't take back an approval of an application that you have approved for your child to download. There's no method or mechanism for you to revoke that consent. So the Google Play Store does have that ability to unapprove that app, but the Apple App Store does not. So that is something that if this is going to go into effect, the Apple App Store will need to add that ability, but this doesn't say that it needs to add the ability. It just says that it needs to notify a developer when a parent revokes consent, but it doesn't say that the App Store has to allow a parent to revoke consent. So they do need to add that as part of the bill, because it's not going to work that I have to notify the developer if a parent revokes consent, but I have no way for the parent to actually revoke consent. After it discusses the App Store requirements, and there's a lot more in here that I am not going to go over. I'm just pointing out the different parts where it might be a little confusing. Most of the rest of it is pretty straightforward. The kid can't download an app without parental consent, and it kind of just goes into details about that. So the next section is about what the developer requirements is. And I'm not necessarily a fan of this section. So I was kind of like, as I started reading it, I'm like, is this kind of a backdoor into what their previous social media bill was all about, that is going to require the applications themselves, like Snapchat, Instagram, etc., to have to change fundamental ways that their application works in order to comply with this? It's too much for these individual applications to maintain, especially for smaller developers and things like that. So a lot of this, I was like, I don't know that a lot of this is necessary. As long as the onus is on the App Store itself, the application can't be downloaded without the parental consent. So what liability does the developer have in order to comply with that if the App Store is the one that's supposed to do that gatekeeping for them? The only thing that I think it should be a requirement for the individual applications is to make sure that their application is categorized correctly and in the right age category, so that it has all of the issues and content warnings and things like that. All of that should be put on the application themselves to provide that information to the App Store so they have accurate information. And the requirement should be that that is accurate information. As I read further into the bill, I found a part where it kind of addresses that same scenario, and it is down into Section 2 of Safe Harbor area, where it says, for purposes of setting the age category of an app and providing content description disclosures to an App Store provider, developer complies with the subsection if the developer uses widely adopted industry standards to determine the app's age category and the content description disclosures, and applies those standards consistently and in good faith. So this does address that concern, but so I think the rest of the requirements for the app themselves can be kind of taken away as long as this section is in here, where it's putting it on the application themselves to make sure it is in the correct age category and it has all of the content description disclosures appropriately labeled. So this law is set to really go into effect May 6, 2026. There are a few different dates in this law, but the majority of the restrictions and requirements are set to take place on May 6, 2026. So we will see what happens. The previous law had injunctions created by NetChoice, which is a conglomerate of Meta and Snapchat and X and all of the other social media platforms that got together to kind of combat these laws. But they actually are in agreement with this law, again, because it puts most of the onus on the App Store themselves. So we will see if Google and Apple will come in to oppose this one. Said the other one was blocked by the Supreme Court. I'm sure there's an appeals process and things going on with that. But for now, that one's not going to go into effect anytime soon. But this one for now is May 6, 2026. But we will see if Google and Apple decide to challenge the constitutionality of this law as well. So overall, I'm actually a fan of these legislation bills because I think they're not necessarily overreaching. The App Store bill is slightly overreaching, but I feel like sometimes when you leave it to the responsibility of an individual company to do the right thing, they don't always do the right thing. So I think this is the right thing for Google Play and Apple App Store to do in order to provide safety for families and provide tools to parents to really be able to manage their children's devices. So many kids will lie about their age to sign up for individual applications, and a lot of parents don't know that they can set up their child's device to approve different apps. So this is really going to do a lot, I think, to educate parents on what they can do to make sure their kids have a good experience on technology and that they aren't going into something that they wouldn't approve of. In the vein of, I just wish companies would do the right thing, I would love to see something more along the lines, as opposed to the social media stuff that they have tried to pass as law. I would love to see more of responsibility taken on companies like Snapchat and like Instagram, where it allows parents to monitor those platforms effectively. So right now it's kind of piecemeal. You can monitor this platform really well, but you can't monitor this platform. You need a third-party service to monitor that. I'd love to see more consistency in allowing parents to manage and monitor their child's accounts across the board. And then parents can choose to manage or monitor it, but the option would be there. And I think that's what's so important. Again, I don't like laws telling people what they can and cannot do, like that previous Utah bill where it said kids under the age of 17 can't access Instagram after 10 p.m. I don't need a law to tell me that. I can make decisions for my child, but as long as the applications allow me to make those decisions for my child, I think that is where we should be going with these laws and restrictions. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of these laws coming out. States do you think are leading the way in this front? Do you think the federal government is going to step in? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and all of your opinions on this matter. Go ahead and leave your thoughts, and I will see you in the next episode.